Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, we got the big news, which was the reworked bow skill gems in Conquerors of the Atlas. But just first, before we get on to discussing how Tornado Shot got nerfed, and just how significant that nerf is, there was one little other bit that may have been easy to miss, and that was this little post. Natalia from GGG posted this example of a rare item that has one of the new influenced mods on it. These are the things that are replacing Shaper and Elder items. And Runegrasp Titan Gauntlets is a pretty average pair of gloves, but this mod is extremely powerful. So let's have a look what we've got here. Middle tier, life resist item, then strike skills target one additional nearby enemy. This is half of the benefit of the Ancestral Call support gem with none of the drawbacks. What this does is it allows builds that use strike skills. Strike skills are generally melee up-close skills that do not have the AoE tag. So as some examples of strikes, Viper Strike, Heavy Strike, Dual Strike, all of these are skills that hit only one target by default. Well, they used to hit only one target, now they hit one target plus a very small range around it. What the Ancestral Call support gem does is it causes Phantom Hands to swing a copy of your weapon at other nearby enemies, if there are other nearby enemies. Strike skills, at least in theory, excel at dealing single target damage, but with the ability to target additional nearby enemies with phantom copies of your weapon, suddenly you can apply that damage to at least be functional when it comes to clear speed. Even with a bunch of sources of strike skills targeting one additional nearby enemy, like this mod, you're not going to be a clear speed god with a strike skill, but it might be serviceable. And with how good strike skills can be against bosses, it may be enough to make one of those builds worth your while considering. In terms of other sources of this mod, of course there is the Ancestral Call support gem, which gives you twice the effect of this, but does have the huge opportunity cost of being a support gem. There's also Ancestral Call Plus, which will drop from Conquerors of the Atlas content, and is a strictly better version. It creates 3 additional hands that strike nearby enemies. There is also the ability to anoint your amulet. The Blight content will still be in the game. The cost for this anointment is 1 gold, 1 silver, and 1 opalescent oil. So that's basically 1.45 gold oils, which could be quite expensive next league. But it's one of each of the top 3 tiers of oils. But I think it'll be something that will have a serious payoff. And the fact that you can do that and stack it, so you can get the anointment on your amulet and stack it with the gauntlets, means that you may feel you don't need to run either Ancestral Call or Ancestral Call Plus support. You may be able to simply rely upon these 2 passive sources that you can get. That's going to make for some big improvements for melee builds that can then focus more on doing heavy damage with their attacks. Anyways, that's enough on melee because we're here to talk about bow skills, and there was some big information on bow skill reworks. GGG also put up a video explaining some of these things. I'll watch that through with you in a sec and give you my thoughts. But firstly, Explosive Arrow. Explosive Arrow is being transformed somewhat. At the moment, Explosive Arrow is capped at 5 arrows in a target, and each time that you hit a target, it deals some damage. It deals the initial hit damage of Explosive Arrow, and refreshes the duration of a special debuff on the target. Now, there's no limit to the number of explosive arrows in the target, and the duration can't be refreshed. And I want to be clear here that where in most cases increasing the duration of debuffs tends to be a good thing. For Explosive Arrow, you want to go the other way, except if we go with the Ignite route, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But the duration can't be refreshed. This means it's just a fixed duration. We don't yet have that duration. I'm just going to predict that it's 4 seconds, but hopefully I'll be pleasantly surprised and it will be less. So what happens is you keep firing arrows into an enemy with Explosive Arrow, and you'll have regular explosions rather than having to stop firing for a few seconds to wait for them to explode. The radius of the explosion grows with each arrow that you hit in the target. So you basically pepper the enemy full of arrows like a pincushion. The more arrows that you hit them with, the bigger the boom is, and the boom happens after a certain number of times after certain amount of time after the first arrow hits them. The skill no longer deals secondary damage with its explosion, which greatly limited support and passive options, as many specific damage modifiers wouldn't apply. This is big news. Secondary damage is extremely hard to scale. A good example of this is the damage that is dealt by Herald of Ice. It's not affected by modifiers that affect spell damage, and it's not affected by a lot of other things that you might have. The best way to scale Herald of Ice tends to either be to use support gems to add more damage to it, or to scale up the gem level of the Herald of Ice itself, because it's secondary damage. There is another way you can do it, and that is to use the Spiritual Aid Cluster, which causes increases and reductions to minion damage to apply to your skills as well, and then use a bunch of things that increase minion damage. They will apply to all damage your character does, including secondary damage, or you can use universal damage increases like Leo's Ring Enchants. However, there's not all that many ways to do it. That's changing though now. Now, each arrow's explosion will deal, well, it's dealing normal damage. It will deal a portion of your base weapon damage, with a large bonus of added fire damage, and the full effect of any other added damage. This still makes scaling the level of the gem useful, as you'll be boosting the fire damage of the explosion. Additionally, you'll also boost the portion of your base weapon damage. But now stats like increased bow damage will apply to the entire explosion. And I've got to say, that's going to be significant. The explosion consumes all explosive arrows on the target and deals a combined damage of all arrow explosions, letting you build up a very strong ignite. And the skill deals more damage with ignite for each explosive arrow in the target. Okay, so let's talk about the division here between building for hits and explosions versus building for explosions and ignite. Ignite is strange in that only the biggest ignite that you've inflicted on an enemy deals damage, at least in the normal state of the game. This is pretty common with a lot of damage over time effects in Path of Exile. Only the best one applies. You don't get to stack a whole bunch of different damage over time sources. And your goal here is to do as much damage with Ignite as possible. What you want to do is massively build up an explosion and then set it off. The ways that you will do this will be to increase the duration, if you're able to do so, increase the duration of the explosion charge up, and then pepper the enemy with as many arrows as you can, whilst ensuring that your arrows deal as much damage as possible. You'll then use different support gems like Ignite Proliferation to ensure that this Ignite doesn't just hit the enemy you're targeting, but also hits more enemies as well. You'll also add things like Swift Affliction to deal more damage with the Ignite, which won't help the base damage of the skill. On the flip side, if your goal is to scale the hit damage, you're going to want to go down a different route. You're going to want to try and increase the frequency the explosion goes off. Because one time you're going to be disappointed with this skill is if you kill an enemy before it explodes. I'm not sure that you're going to actually see the explosion go off and damage nearby enemies. So for that reason, I think that for bosses, Explosive Arrow could go either way. Either the Ignite approach or the damage approach could be best. But for multi-target situations where you're wanting to kill all the enemies on a map, I think you're either going to want to pick a different skill, or alternately, you're going to want to use Explosive Arrow for its hits, rather than its ignites. I'm open to being proven wrong though, especially once we see hard numbers on this skill, which we do not have yet. Of course, the Barrage Support is an efficient way to stack up arrows in a target, great for dealing high damage to bosses with a large explosion afterwards. I think one of the ideal situations here is firing off a barrage of arrows that mostly hit the boss, and then the explosion does all the work in killing the trash nearby. Sometimes I don't think that's going to be something that you've got the luxury to do. Often the trash will be too dangerous for you to be able to do that, but we'll have to see how that works in practice. In terms of Ascendancy choices, if you're going to go with Explosive Arrow hits and explosions, so not the Ignite route, then I think Deadeye is just better than all other options. Deadeye's ability to grant you one free chain will ensure that you're stacking up more and more and more and more and more. More and more arrows into every enemy around you, and those ones will then explode for more, you'll just end up with better screen coverage than you can get via any other method. So I think that's the way to go if you want to go with the hits and the explosions. If on the other hand you want to scale Ignite, I think that some of the options you might want to consider going the Chieftain route, or consider going the Trickster route. Others have also mentioned the Elementalist, and whilst I'm not that sold on it myself, certainly lots of people think it's good, so I will mention it as a possibility here as well. Next up we have Shrapnel Shot. Now this is being renamed to Galvanic Arrow, because although Shrapnel Shot sounds like it's something that, you know, pumps an enemy full of lead, it's actually not pumping them full of lead at the moment, it's pumping them full of static electricity. So Galvanic Arrow is a better name for it, making the lightning theme more obvious and differentiating the skill from the new Shrapnel Ballista. The skill still has a damage cone, but its projectiles are now limited range, travelling a base distance of 40 before projectile speed modifiers. And we'll see how much coverage that is when we watch the video GGG put up. But it's about twice the range of cleave. The skill now comes with 2 additional projectiles, giving a close range focus to the skill, and it has added lightning damage that grows as the gem levels. The skill has a new mechanic that lets projectile speed modifiers apply to its area of effect, making it much easier to scale up the skill's damage cone while simultaneously increasing the range of projectiles. Overall, the skill is now focused on being a close range skill at lower levels, but one that can scale to a higher damage area at higher levels. There are also changes to the collateral damage threshold jewel, which is going legacy, but existing ones will... they seem to be pretty reasonable choices to use, but you don't need them anymore, so I think that'll be good. Lastly, there's Burning Arrow, which we were discussing in a previous video. Burning Arrow looks like it's a really strong option for either single target or for Ignite proliferation. One thing they do mention here, which I thought was going to be the case, the new stacking burning effect on it can't proliferate as it doesn't count as an Ignite, but that's fine. You're mostly going to use your small Ignites will proliferate and kill trash, and then you'll be able to fire more and more arrows into the more resilient enemies. So that's the tanky rare monsters, the occasional ultra tanky magic monster, the tanky rares, and the unique monsters. Now, the sudden ignition threshold jewel is going away, as is the pitch darkness threshold jewel, and there's going to be some changes to the existing sudden ignition jewels when they go legacy in Standard League. But for those of you that are playing in the Metamorph League, the sudden ignition and pitch darkness jewels will flat out not exist anymore. Now we get the news that's probably most exciting to me, and that actually prompted a cheer at ExileCon when it was announced, and that is Tornado Shot being nerfed. Tornado Shot is so brokenly overpowered at the moment that basically it renders, once you reach a high enough gear level, and I will say Tornado Shot really underperforms if your gear is bad, but once you reach a certain gear level, Tornado Shot renders every other choice irrelevant in terms of bow skills, except for Scourge Arrow. We'll come to Scourge Arrow later because it's getting nerfed in a different way. The reason that Tornado Shot is so OP at the moment is partly that it is solid damage. It's not the best damaging skill for a bow, but what it does is it applies damage around corners, and it applies damage multiple screens away. So, you can fire off one arrow, it will then hit an enemy, the secondary projectiles can then hit enemies that you can't even see, and if you can't see an enemy, they certainly can't see you. And then from that enemy, chain off to hit another enemy that you had no idea was anywhere nearby. This creates a situation where basically monsters, unless they're capable of posing a threat from more than a screen away, they need to have an after-death effect to be dangerous to Tornado Shot builds. So Tornado Shot is being nerfed in a really interesting way, one that I hadn't thought of. I was expecting, oh yeah, there'll be a numerical nerf and the helmet enchant will go fully legacy. But no, we're seeing something quite different. What they're doing is making the secondary projectiles into limited range projectiles. If you've never played with Tornado Shot, you basically fire at an area on your screen, and when your arrow hits there, it then explodes into a trio by default, but scalable to 4 with the Labyrinth enchant, or scalable to up to 6 with Legacy Labyrinth enchants if you play in Standard. So you'll fire a shot, and then it'll explode into 3, 4, 5, or 6 additional projectiles, which will then travel off until they hit something, or until they've gone a long way. They're now only going to go a short way looking for another target. The key thing this is going to do is, I think it'll keep the skill viable, but it's going to stop you from being able to multi off-screen with it. It's also going to stop you from being able to do really degenerate stuff by shooting around corners and hitting monsters that that have no way of even registering that you're present, let alone of fighting back at you. So that's the nature of the nerf. But the interesting thing about it is that if you invest heavily in projectile speed, you may be able to recover some of the current functionality of the skill. Now, of course, investing in projectile speed comes at an opportunity cost. It means that the investment you're putting into that projectile speed can't be also put into dealing more damage, can't be also put into getting faster attacks. I think this is going to be a considerable nerf, but I don't think it's game over for the skill. What I think is going to happen is that the bar for entry for Tornado Shot being good is going to be raised. You are going to need to hit a considerably higher gear level before Tornado Shot starts performing well. And once you hit that gear level, I think it may still well be the best bow skill in the game. But hitting that gear level is going to entail making considerable investments in projectile speed as well. Ice Shot. Ice Shot's having its chilled ground removed as changes to calculations of chill and shock. These haven't been revealed yet, by the way. There's a big overhaul of ailments coming up we don't know much about. But this will make it easy to apply chill to a target equivalent to the slow that was already granted by chilled ground. The chill ground was only applying to a very small area, so the skill will now have a more reliable chill over its full area of effect. We'll also be adding new stats to the skill that make its chill more powerful and reliable. So, Ice Shot is going to be something that will be chilling enemies directly rather than indirectly through putting chilling shit on the ground. This is something that I need to see in practice. My first thought is saying that running support gems like, I believe it's Hypothermia, and I will just quickly pause and check that. And that indeed it is. Hypothermia is the support gem that causes you to have a chance to freeze enemies that are chilled, and to inflict meaner chills, and to add more damage when you're targeting enemies that are chilled. This combination is going to mean that you're going to be more able to get benefit out of Hypothermia with Ice Shot. Hypothermia is already a reasonably good support gem, so for that reason I think there's a lot of potential there for this to maybe take off. We need to see the numbers. The key thing is that freezing enemies enables you to set off extremely potent explosions with Herald of Ice. And if Herald of Ice is able to work really well with Ice Shot, which I expect that it will be able to, we may be able to see Herald of Ice Ice Shot builds clearing very effectively in future content. I do think that Ice Shot may be a little bit lackluster in single target situations. We'll have to possibly work out an alternate solution for dealing damage to bosses, although of course we'll have to keep our eyes out on that. Maybe the numbers are good enough, we'll have to see. Blast Rain. The number of Blast Rain explosions is now affected by the number of projectiles the skill fires. This was revealed yesterday and I did a video discussing it. This means additional projectiles are now a significant damage multiplier, similar to how additional projectiles affect Barrage, to make its focus damage much more competitive with other bow skills. Its enchantment is being buffed as a result of this change, granting one additional projectile instead of a chance for an additional blast. That's big news. So Blast Rain may end up becoming one of those skills that goes from being solid to extraordinary when you can get one of these Eternal Labyrinth enchants that functions as a damage multiplier. I think that in the next league, I believe it's the Hunter influenced items that are the ones that have the bow-oriented modifiers primarily on them. If I'm correct on that front, you are definitely going to want to be enchanting Hunter-influenced helmets in the Eternal Labyrinth when you're running the Eternal Labyrinth, or when you're slamming things with enchanted fossils. Scourge Arrow. Scourge Arrow is getting nerfed and changed, and probably better at low level and worse at high level. But Scourge Arrow's base weapon damage has been lowered, but the skill now deals additional chaos damage that grows as the gem levels. The skill is most often used alongside builds that added elemental damage, so this change is intended to grant a greater reward to chaos damage based builds, whilst also improving its usability while leveling. So, this is a nerf. This is actually the second significant nerf to Scourge Arrow builds that run as many Abyss Jewels as possible in order to deal as much cold damage as is humanly possible with one single arrow shot. They're going to lose a lot of their cold damage, and they're going to gain some chaos damage that they don't really care about. On the flip side, the builds that like to run a physical and chaos skill, then there might be a whole lot of new builds that are rendered possible by these changes of Scourge Arrow. Got to see it in practice. Don't know what it's going to be like. Split Arrow now has added physical damage on the gem that grows as its levels, with a slightly lower base damage. Makes it more powerful while leveling, being less dependent on having a very powerful bow. Can I just say, this is going to be a great change for very low level play. Split Arrow is one of the first bow skills you get your hands on, and it feels like it just tickles enemies if you're using a bad bow. If it actually does a lot of damage, then that will be good, and you'll still feel upgrades when you're leveling. Also, Split Arrow and Barrage is looking like something that really needs to be given some consideration in the new league. Other bow and wand skills have received numerical tweaks, which you'll be able to see when we provide the full list of skill gems. This is going to be the big thing for build theory crafting this league, getting our hands on the full list of skill gems when they change. There's also some visual improvements made, but let's watch the video outlining how these skills look in practice. So this is Explosive Arrow. Pepper the zombie full of arrows, then go bada boom, and here it is with Barrage. You see that peppers it quicker. Let's just go back and watch that Barrage one again. You'll see how many arrows are stuck in it. I'm actually quite impressed with the graphic effects there as well, and then that causes it to go off quicker. Oh, I love telemarketers at this time of the evening. So we're back to looking at the Explosive Arrow and Barrage Support combo, going slowly this time, and see it's peppered full of arrows, and then it's going to go bada boom. You'll notice there something is really apparent there, that the zombie exploded much earlier. It took a lot longer when it was just being used with Explosive Arrow on its own. Made several steps forward, survived one explosion, then boom on the second. Whereas here, boom, straight away. Here's a Galvanic Arrow, and it's really hard to judge how much damage that's doing. Burning Arrow, which doesn't really have any clear effects, and here's just a bunch of bow skills being used. This is what I quite like the way they've done this here. They've taken a character that is really underpowered for the content they're running through, and just going and killing monsters in what's presumably either the monster level 50 zone in Act 6, or alternately it could be a reef map. You see the character is struggling a bit, but managing. They're kiting aggressively and using a whole range of different skills, but all the new ones. Running away from monsters, firing in arrows where they can. And you're getting those satisfying explosions from Explosive Arrow. And then you're going to see them go up against porcupines and play extremely well around porcupines, which is something that the number of times I've died to these things is unbelievable. I don't think they take a single hit from the porcupine spikes. Anyways, that's all I've got on these information that came out today, except to just add that there will be more changes that are made as they finalise bow changes, including enchantments, passives, unique balance, and more. You'll have to wait until the balance manifesto and patch notes to hear them, but I'll bet you that they will include a significant nerf to a certain mod that adds 3 to 5 damage for every 10 dexterity your character has to bow attacks. Anyways, going to leave it there. Any comments or questions, fire away below.